The rain hammered against the windows of the briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command in San Diego. Commander Jack Morrison stood at the head of the long conference table, his arms crossed over his chest as he studied the folder in front of him. 20 years of service had taught him to read people quickly, and right now, he was reading a file that made absolutely no sense. Sarah Chen sat 3 chairs down from him, her posture relaxed but alert. She wore simple civilian clothes, a dark jacket over a gray shirt, and her black hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. Nothing about her screamed special operator. She looked like she could be a college student or maybe a young professional grabbing coffee before work. That was exactly what bothered Morrison. The room held 8 of his best SEAL team members. Men he had led through missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and places that never made it onto any official record. They were warriors, every single one of them. They had earned their place at this table through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. And now, someone from another agency was being attached to their team for an operation in Eastern Europe, and that someone looked like she should be teaching yoga classes, not running tactical operations. Morrison cleared his throat. The chatter in the room died down immediately. His men knew that sound meant it was time to focus. "Gentlemen, we have a guest joining us for Operation Nightfall," Morrison began, his voice carrying the authority of 2 decades in command. "This is Sarah Chen from, well, an agency that prefers not to be named in briefings." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Everyone knew what that meant. CIA, probably, or one of those alphabet soup organizations that operated in the shadows. Sarah nodded politely but said nothing. Her dark eyes scanned the room once, taking in each face, and then returned to Morrison. There was something in that gaze that he could not quite place. It was not nervousness or intimidation. It was calculation. "Miss Chen comes highly recommended," Morrison continued, though his tone suggested he had his doubts. "She'll be providing intelligence support and local knowledge for our target area. Her job is to get us in, point us in the right direction, and stay out of the way while we do the heavy lifting." One of his men, Lieutenant Jake Peters, leaned back in his chair. "No offense, ma'am, but we usually work with people who have been through the same training we have. What's your background?" It was a fair question, and Morrison wanted to hear the answer too. The file on Sarah Chen was frustratingly thin. There were credentials, sure, and clearances that went higher than most generals he knew, but actual operational history. That part was blacked out, redacted, classified above his pay grade, which was saying something. Sarah smiled slightly. "I understand the concern. I've worked in the field for 7 years, primarily in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. I speak 6 languages fluently, and I have experience in reconnaissance and intelligence gathering in hostile territory." "That's great," Peters said, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "But can you shoot? Can you move under fire? Because where we're going, knowing how to say please and thank you in Russian won't stop a bullet." Morrison saw Sarah's smile widen, just a fraction. "I can handle myself, Lieutenant." The way she said it made Morrison pause. There was no defensiveness in her voice, no need to prove herself. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered with the kind of quiet confidence that usually came from experience. Still, he had seen plenty of people who talked a good game but fell apart when things got real. "We'll see," Morrison said, closing the folder. "Right now, let's talk about the mission. We have intelligence that suggests a high-value target is operating out of a compound near the Ukrainian border. This individual has been facilitating weapons transfers to hostile groups, and our job is to go in, confirm identity, and extract or eliminate. Time window is 72 hours from insertion." The briefing continued for another hour. Maps were studied, satellite photos analyzed, and contingency plans developed. Sarah contributed where appropriate, pointing out details about local militia movements and suggesting routes that avoided known checkpoints. Her knowledge was impressive, Morrison had to admit. She knew the area like someone who had actually been there, not just studied it from a desk. As the meeting broke up, Morrison gestured for Sarah to stay behind. His men filed out, and he heard Peters mutter something about babysitting tourists that earned a few quiet laughs. Morrison shut the door. "Look, Miss Chen," he started, keeping his voice level. "I'm sure you're very good at what you do, but My job is to bring my men home alive. I can't do that if I'm worried about someone who might freeze up or become a liability in the field. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rain. You don't trust me? That's fair. You don't know me. It's not personal. It absolutely is personal, Commander. And it should be. She turned to face him. You care about your team. That makes you a good leader. But you should know something. I was assigned to this mission specifically because of what's waiting for us in that compound. Morrison frowned. What do you mean? The target you're going after? He's not just some arms dealer. He's connected to a network that's been operating in the shadows for 15 years. I've been tracking parts of this network for most of my career. This is personal for me, too. There was something in her voice now, an edge that had not been there before. Morrison had heard that tone before, usually from soldiers who had lost friends or been through something that changed them. What happened? He asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Let's just say I have my reasons for wanting this mission to succeed. And Commander, I promise you, I won't be a liability. Give me a chance to prove it. Morrison studied her face. Behind the calm exterior, he saw something else. Determination. Maybe even a little bit of steel. He made a decision. All right, we leave in 48 hours. Training starts tomorrow at 0600. If you're going to be on my team even temporarily, you'll train with us. We'll see what you're made of. Sarah nodded. I'll be there. The next morning came cold and gray. Morrison arrived at the training facility at 5:30 to find Sarah already there, dressed in tactical pants and a moisture-wicking shirt, stretching near the obstacle course. She looked up as he approached. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Time zones, she replied. I just got back from overseas last week. His team started arriving in ones and twos, each man looking surprised to see Sarah already present. Peters arrived last, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He offered one to Morrison and completely ignored Sarah. All right, let's warm up, Morrison announced. 5-mile run, then we'll work the course. What happened over the next 2 hours changed Morrison's opinion considerably. Sarah kept pace with his team during the run, not struggling, not complaining. When they hit the obstacle course, she moved through it with an efficiency that spoke of serious training. She was not as fast as his men, they were larger and stronger, but she was smart about her movements, using technique where they used power. The real surprise came at the range. Morrison set up a series of shooting drills, starting with basic marksmanship and progressing to more complex scenarios involving movement and target identification. His men performed as expected. They were professionals who lived and breathed this work. Then Sarah stepped up to the line. Morrison handed her a standard issue pistol, and she checked it with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times. The first drill was simple, 10 rounds at 25 meters, all center mass. She fired in a smooth, controlled rhythm. When the target came back, all 10 holes were grouped in a circle smaller than Morrison's fist. Peters whistled low. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's try something harder, Morrison said. He was not sure why he felt the need to push her, but something about this whole situation still bothered him. He set up a tactical scenario, multiple targets at varying distances, some marked as hostiles, some as civilians. The shooter had to move through a course, engage the right targets, and make quick decisions under time pressure. His men ran it first, posting solid times with few mistakes. Sarah went last. She moved through the course like water, smooth and fluid. Her shots were precise, her target identification instant. When she finished, her time was not the fastest, but her accuracy was flawless. Not a single wrong target hit, not a single miss. Morrison found himself reassessing. This was not some desk analyst who had been pushed into the field. This was someone with serious training and real experience. During the lunch break, Morrison sat down across from Sarah in the mess hall. Where did you learn to shoot like that? She looked up from her food. Here and there, different programs, different instructors. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give you right now, Commander. She set down her fork. I know you want to know everything about me. You want to know where I trained, who I worked with. what operations I've been on. I understand that. But some of that information is classified at levels that even you don't have access to. What I can tell you is this. I've been doing this kind of work since I was 22 years old. I've operated in 12 different countries, and I'm very, very good at not dying. Morrison had to respect the directness. Fair enough, but I'm still going to push you hard over the next 2 days. I would expect nothing less. The afternoon brought more drills, close quarters combat, vehicle operations, emergency medical procedures. Sarah held her own in every exercise. She was not the best at any single skill, but she was consistently competent across the board. More importantly, she did not panic, did not hesitate, and did not make excuses when she made a mistake. By the end of the second day, Morrison's team had warmed up to her considerably. Peters even made a joke about her being tougher than she looks, which was high praise coming from him. Morrison noticed that Sarah never tried to be one of the guys, never pretended to be something she was not. She remained professional, focused, and just friendly enough to not seem cold. The night before they deployed, Morrison held a final briefing. Intelligence had been updated. The compound they were hitting was more heavily defended than initially thought. There might be as many as 15 hostiles on site, and the local militia had increased patrols in the area. This changes the risk profile significantly, Morrison said, looking around the table. We're going to need to move faster and hit harder. Any objections to proceeding? His men shook their heads. They had been through worse. Sarah raised her hand slightly. I have a suggestion. There's an old drainage system that runs under that part of the compound. It was built during the Soviet era. If we can access it, we could get inside with minimal exposure. Morrison pulled up the satellite imagery. I don't see any entrance. It's not visible from above, but I know where it is. I've been in that system before. The room went quiet. Peters leaned forward. You've been inside that compound? Not exactly. I was tracking someone who used those tunnels 3 years ago. I went in after them. Mapped it out, at least part of it. She pulled out a hand-drawn map from her jacket. This is what I remember. The entrance is here, about 200 meters from the compound wall. The tunnel runs underneath and comes up in the basement of the main building. Morrison studied the map. It was detailed, showing measurements and structural notes. Why didn't this show up in the intelligence brief? Because I never filed a report on it. The mission I was on went sideways. I had to extract quickly, and by the time I was debriefed, the focus had shifted to other targets. This place fell off the radar until now. Morrison looked at his team, then back at Sarah. If we use this approach, you'll need to lead us through. Can you do that? Yes. And if the layout has changed? If they've blocked the tunnels? Then we adapt. But Commander, this gives us a real advantage. They won't be expecting an approach from below. Morrison made his decision. All right, we'll use the tunnel. But Miss Chen, if this goes wrong, if we get stuck down there or walk into an ambush, that's on you. Understood. They flew out at 2300 hours that night, a small military transport that would drop them 50 kilometers from the target zone. From there, they would move overland, using the darkness and their training to stay invisible. The mission was a go, and Sarah Chen was now fully part of the team. The flight was long and uncomfortable. Morrison sat in the webbed seating, watching his team prepare their gear with the automatic movements that came from countless repetitions. Sarah sat near the rear, checking her own equipment with the same methodical care. She caught him looking and gave a small nod. Morrison found himself wondering about her again. Who was she really? What had she done to earn those high-level clearances? And why did someone with her skills agree to attach to a SEAL team instead of running her own operation? The loadmaster signaled 5 minutes to drop. Everyone stood, double-checking straps and weapons. Morrison moved down the line, making eye contact with each of his men, a silent confirmation that they were ready. When he got to Sarah, he paused. You good? I'm good, Commander. Once we hit the ground, you stay close to me. We move as one unit. No heroes, no solo acts. Clear? Crystal clear. The ramp opened and cold air rushed into the aircraft. Below, the dark landscape stretched out like a black ocean. Morrison checked his altimeter one last time, then gave the signal. One by one, his team jumped into the night. Sarah went fourth in the line, disappearing into the darkness without hesitation. Morrison jumped last, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline as gravity took hold. His chute deployed perfectly, and he steered toward the rally point, watching the small infrared markers from his team's helmets below. They all landed within 100 meters of each other, exactly as planned. Within 10 minutes, they had buried their chutes, formed up, and begun the long movement toward the target. Sarah moved in the middle of the formation, her night vision goggles scanning the terrain ahead. Morrison watched her carefully, looking for signs of fatigue or hesitation. He saw neither. They moved through the night like ghosts, covering ground quickly but carefully. Every few hundred meters they would stop, listen, and scan for threats. The landscape was rural, a mixture of abandoned farmland and scrub forest. Perfect terrain for staying hidden, but also perfect for ambushes. 3 hours into the movement, they reached a small ridgeline overlooking the target compound. Morrison brought everyone down into a defensive position and pulled out his binoculars. The compound sat in a shallow valley, a cluster of buildings surrounded by a high wall. Lights burned in a few windows, and he could see at least 2 guards walking a patrol route along the perimeter. Sarah crawled up beside him. The tunnel entrance is on the northwest side behind that tree line. We'll need to approach from the west to stay in cover. Morrison nodded and signaled to his team. They adjusted their route, moving slowly and deliberately. Every sound seemed amplified in the quiet night, the crunch of gravel under boots, the soft rustle of equipment, even their own breathing. It took another 40 minutes to reach the tree line Sarah had indicated. She moved to the front of the formation, scanning the ground with her flashlight set to infrared. After a few minutes of searching, she knelt down and began clearing away leaves and debris. Underneath was a concrete slab, old and cracked, with a rusted metal ring set into its center. "This is it," she whispered. Peters grabbed the metal ring and pulled. The slab resisted at first. Sealed by years of rust and dirt, but with help from another team member, it slowly lifted. The smell that emerged was exactly what Morrison expected: damp earth, stagnant water, and decay. He clicked on his flashlight and pointed it down into the hole. A metal ladder descended into darkness. Sarah went first without being asked. She slung her rifle over her shoulder and started down the ladder, moving quickly but carefully. Morrison went second, then the rest of the team followed. The tunnel at the bottom was exactly as Sarah had described: a concrete pipe about 6 feet in diameter, barely tall enough to stand in. Water stood in puddles along the floor, and the walls were covered in moss and mineral deposits. They moved through the tunnel in single file, weapons ready, every sense heightened. The darkness was complete, except for their flashlights, creating strange moving shadows that played tricks on the eyes. Morrison kept his attention split between the path ahead and Sarah's movements. She navigated the tunnel with confidence, taking specific turns at intersections without hesitation. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 15 minutes, Sarah stopped and pointed upward. A vertical shaft climbed up into the ceiling, another ladder leading to what Morrison assumed was the compound above. She climbed up and paused at the top, pressing her ear against what looked like a wooden hatch. After a long moment, she carefully pushed it open a few inches and peered through. Morrison held his breath. This was the moment where everything could go wrong. If someone was on the other side, if an alarm had been triggered, if Sarah had miscalculated, his team would be trapped in this tunnel with nowhere to go. Sarah opened the hatch wider and pulled herself up. Morrison followed immediately, emerging into what appeared to be a storage basement filled with old crates and dusty equipment. The room was empty of people, lit only by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. The rest of the team came up quickly and quietly, forming a defensive perimeter while Morrison and Sarah checked the door. The door was locked from their side, which was good. Morrison pulled out a small mirror on an extendable pole and slipped it under the door, checking the hallway beyond. Empty. He tested the lock and found it opened easily from the inside. They were in. Morrison gathered his team close and spoke in a low whisper. "We split into 2 elements. Peters, you take 3 men and secure the ground floor. Find the target, confirm identity. My element will handle the upper floor and provide overwatch. Sarah, you're with me. Questions? There were none. These men knew their jobs. Morrison checked his watch. They had been on the ground for 4 hours. Dawn was still 3 hours away, which gave them time, but not much. His team moved out with practiced precision. Peters and his element disappeared toward the ground floor while Morrison led his group up a stairway they found at the end of the hallway. Every step was calculated, weapons sweeping corners, eyes scanning for threats. The building was quiet, almost too quiet. Morrison's instincts were screaming at him that something was wrong. They reached the second floor without incident. Morrison deployed his men to cover the key positions and then moved with Sarah toward what the intelligence brief had identified as the target's living quarters. The door was heavy wood, old but solid. Morrison tried the handle. Locked. He was about to signal for a breaching charge when Sarah touched his arm and shook her head. She pulled out a small leather case from her vest and extracted what looked like lockpicks. Morrison watched in surprise as she worked the lock, her movements quick and practiced. Within 30 seconds, there was a soft click, and the door opened. The room beyond was empty. Not just empty of people, but empty of everything. No furniture, no personal items, nothing. It looked like it had been cleared out recently. Morrison felt his stomach tighten. This was wrong. "Commander," Sarah whispered urgently, "this is a setup." Morrison was about to respond when his radio crackled with Peter's voice, barely controlled panic breaking through the usual calm. "Contact! We've got multiple hostiles, ground floor is hot. They were waiting for us." The sound of gunfire erupted from below, muffled by the building but unmistakable. Morrison made a split-second decision. "All elements, fall back to the basement. Move now." His team responded instantly, training overriding any confusion or fear. They moved quickly toward the stairway, covering each other's movements. Morrison could hear more gunfire now, and shouting in Russian. The whole building seemed to be coming alive with hostile forces. They reached the ground floor to find chaos. Peters and his team were fighting a running retreat toward the basement entrance, firing at shadows that seemed to be everywhere. Morrison's element provided covering fire, allowing Peters to disengage and pull back. Bodies lay scattered across the floor, at least 5 hostiles down, but more were coming. Sarah moved beside Morrison, firing controlled bursts with her rifle. He noticed she was not just shooting randomly but picking specific targets, dropping hostiles who were trying to flank or cut off their escape. Her movements were fluid and professional, no wasted motion, no panic. They made it back to the basement entrance, but Morrison could see the problem immediately. More hostiles were pouring in from multiple directions, and they had brought serious firepower. This was not some small militia group. These were trained fighters with modern weapons and tactical coordination. "Into the tunnel," Morrison ordered. "Go, go, go!" His team piled through the hatch and down into the drainage system. Morrison and Sarah provided rear security, firing at anything that moved in the doorway. Morrison heard something metallic hit the floor behind them, and knew what it was before he saw it. "Grenade!" he shouted, grabbing Sarah and pulling her toward the hatch. The explosion was deafening in the confined space, and Morrison felt the concussive wave hit him like a physical force. His ears were ringing, and smoke filled his vision, but he kept moving, practically falling down the ladder with Sarah right behind him. The team was already moving through the tunnel, splashing through the water at a full run. Morrison took up the rear position, checking behind them constantly for pursuit. He could hear shouting from above, and more gunfire. They had maybe a minute before the hostiles figured out where they had gone. They ran through the tunnel system, no longer worried about noise discipline, just focused on speed. Sarah was back in front, navigating by memory and instinct. Morrison trusted her completely now. Whatever else she might be, she knew how to operate under fire. Behind them, Morrison heard the distinctive sound of boots on metal, someone coming down the ladder into the tunnel. He stopped and took a knee, aiming back the way they had come. 2 figures appeared in his night vision, and he fired, dropping both of them. More would follow. But every second they bought was precious. Sarah led them through a series of turns that Morrison had no hope of remembering. The tunnel system was a maze, and without her, they would have been lost. After what felt like an eternity, she stopped at another vertical shaft. "This is our exit," she said between gasps for air. "It comes up about half a kilometer from where we entered, on the other side of the compound." Morrison did not hesitate. "Everyone up, move fast." They climbed one by one, emerging into another cold night. This exit point was less concealed than the entrance had been, just a concrete cylinder sticking out of the ground in an open field. Morrison immediately set up a defensive perimeter while doing a quick head count. Everyone was there. 2 men had minor wounds from shrapnel, but everyone could move. "We need to get to the extraction point," Morrison said, pulling out his GPS. The designated helicopter landing zone was 8 kilometers away through rough terrain. "Double time, tactical formation. Peters, take point. Sarah, stay in the middle. Let's move." They covered the first kilometer at a punishing pace, expecting pursuit at any moment. Morrison kept glancing back, but so far, nothing. That worried him more than if they were being chased. The enemy knew they were out here somewhere. Why were they not following? The answer came 15 minutes later when the sound of helicopter rotors filled the air. Morrison's first thought was that their extraction had come early, but Sarah grabbed his arm and pointed to the south. Multiple helicopters, flying low and fast, searchlights sweeping the ground. "Those are not ours," Morrison said grimly. He looked around, analyzing their options. They were in open farmland with minimal cover. If those helicopters spotted them, they would be sitting ducks. "Everyone, move to that tree line, now. We need to get under cover." They sprinted for the cluster of trees about 200 meters away, the sound of the helicopters getting closer. Morrison could see the searchlights now, powerful beams cutting through the darkness like knives. They were conducting a systematic search pattern, working their way across the terrain. The team made it to the tree line just as one of the helicopters passed directly overhead. Everyone froze, pressing themselves into the shadows and undergrowth. Morrison held his breath as the searchlight swept past, missing them by maybe 20 meters. The helicopter continued on, but Morrison knew their luck would not hold. Eventually, those helicopters would cover every square meter of this area. "We need to call in our extraction now," Peters said, his face grim. "Standard timing puts us at the LZ in 3 hours. We won't make it." Morrison knew he was right. He pulled out his satellite phone and started to dial the emergency extraction code. Before he could complete the call, Sarah stopped him. "Wait," she said quietly. "I have another option." Morrison looked at her, his patience finally fraying. Now is not the time for secrets. What option? Sarah hesitated for just a moment, and Morrison saw something in her face he had not seen before. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. But then it was gone, replaced by that same steel determination. "I can call in an extraction, but it will blow my cover completely. Everyone will know what I am, and I can't go back to being anonymous. It's a burned bridge." "I don't care about your cover," Morrison said flatly. "I care about getting my men home. Make the call." Sarah pulled out her own satellite phone, a different model than the military issue Morrison carried. She dialed a number from memory and waited. When someone answered, she spoke just 3 words. "Ghost Angel. Emergency extraction." The effect was immediate. Even over the phone, Morrison could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by rapid-fire questions. Sarah rattled off their coordinates, the tactical situation, and the timeline. The conversation lasted less than 60 seconds. When she hung up, her face was carefully neutral. "Extraction in 15 minutes, this location. We just need to mark an LZ with infrared strobes." Morrison stared at her. 15 minutes? From where? There's no way our people can get here that fast from the staging area. "They're not your people, Commander. They're mine." Before Morrison could ask what that meant, Peters interrupted. "We've got movement. Ground forces coming from the compound." Morrison could see them now through his night vision. At least 20 hostiles, moving in a tactical formation, sweeping toward their position. The helicopters must have dropped them off. They were being boxed in. "We hold this position," Morrison ordered. "Set up interlocking fields of fire. We've got 15 minutes. We can hold for 15 minutes. His team moved with practiced efficiency. each man taking a position that covered approaches and provided mutual support. Sarah took a position beside Morrison, her rifle ready. As they waited for the hostiles to close in, Morrison finally asked the question that had been building in his mind since that phone call. Ghost Angel? That's your operational code name? Sarah kept her eyes on the approaching enemies. Yes. And who exactly do you work for? Officially, nobody. I'm a ghost, Commander. I don't exist on any roster, any organizational chart, any official document. I'm one of about 20 people in the world who operate completely outside the normal chain of command, answering only to a very small group of people who need things done that can never be acknowledged. Morrison processed that. You're an assassin. Sometimes, other times I'm a spy, a courier, a negotiator, or an intelligence analyst. I'm whatever I need to be to complete a mission. And right now, I'm a teammate, trying to keep you and your men alive. The first shots rang out as the hostiles got within range. Morrison returned fire, his training taking over. Beside him, Sarah was shooting with the same calm precision he had seen on the range. But there was something else now, something different. She moved with absolute confidence, each shot deliberate, each movement calculated. This was not someone playing a role. This was who she really was. The firefight intensified. The hostiles had numbers and were trying to use them, pushing forward in waves. Morrison's team had discipline and superior positions, making every shot count. Bodies started to pile up in the field, but more kept coming. Morrison checked his watch. 10 minutes until extraction. They could hold for 10 minutes. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked out of the darkness and exploded against a tree 20 meters to their left. The blast showered them with splinters and dirt. Morrison heard one of his men cry out. He glanced over to see the man down, bleeding from multiple wounds but still alive. Sarah immediately moved to the wounded man, pulling him back into better cover while maintaining fire discipline. She worked on his wounds with quick, practiced movements, applying tourniquets and pressure bandages while bullets cracked through the air around them. Morrison felt a surge of respect. This woman, whoever she really was, had proven herself a dozen times over in the past few hours. She could fight, navigate, adapt, and now she was saving lives under fire. If they survived this, he owed her an apology for every doubt he had harbored. 5 minutes, Sarah called out, checking her watch. The extraction bird will come in hot. When you see it, we run, no hesitation. Morrison passed the word to his team. 5 more minutes of holding against an enemy that was not giving up. More RPGs streaked through the darkness, and Morrison realized the hostiles were trying to pin them down before rushing their position. It was sound tactics, and it might work. Then he heard it, a sound that was different from the hostile helicopters. Deeper, more powerful. He looked up and saw nothing at first, but the sound grew louder, coming fast and low. Suddenly, a massive helicopter roared overhead, a heavy gunship he recognized as a modified Black Hawk. But the markings were wrong, or rather, there were no markings at all. The gunship opened fire with everything it had, raking the field with cannon fire and rockets. The effect on the hostiles was devastating. Their formation disintegrated as they scattered for cover. The hostile helicopters that had been searching for them suddenly broke off, apparently wanting no part of whatever had just arrived. Now, Sarah shouted, to the LZ! Morrison and his team ran for the open space Sarah had marked with infrared strobes. The gunship continued to provide covering fire, keeping the scattered hostiles suppressed. A second helicopter appeared, this one a transport, coming in fast for a tactical landing. The helicopter touched down for maybe 5 seconds. Morrison and his team piled in, dragging their wounded with them. Sarah came last, providing rear security until the very last moment. The helicopter lifted off, before the ramp was even fully closed, banking hard and accelerating away from the contact area. Morrison collapsed into one of the seats, his ears ringing, his heart pounding. Around him, his team was doing the same, checking weapons and treating wounds with shaking hands. The adrenaline was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. He looked across the cargo bay at Sarah. She was sitting calmly, her rifle resting across her lap, speaking into a radio headset. She looked composed, professional, like this was just another day at the office. When she finished her conversation, she caught Morrison's gaze and gave him a small nod. Morrison got up and made his way over to her, using the cargo netting for balance as the helicopter maneuvered. He sat down beside her and waited until she removed her headset. "Thank you," he said simply. "You saved my team." "We're not out of this yet," Sarah replied, "but you're welcome. Who are you really? And don't give me that ghost story. I need the truth." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking at the faces of the exhausted SEAL team members around them. When she spoke, her voice was soft enough that only Morrison could hear. "The truth is complicated, Commander, but I'll tell you what I can. 7 years ago, I was recruited into a program that doesn't officially exist. We handle missions that are too sensitive, too dangerous, or too illegal for regular military or intelligence operations. We go places no one else can go and do things no one else can do. And when we're done, we disappear, and no one ever knows we were there. Except tonight, people know," Morrison pointed out. "That phone call, that extraction, that's going to raise questions." "Yes, it will, which is why I said it would burn my cover. I can never go back to being invisible now, at least not in this region. But your team was worth it, Commander. You and your men are good people doing a hard job. I was not going to let you die because I wanted to protect my anonymity." Morrison felt the weight of that decision. She had sacrificed something important, something she had probably worked years to build, just to save his team. That kind of sacrifice deserved respect. "The mission," he said. "What went wrong? That compound was a trap. They were waiting for us." Sarah's expression darkened. "I've been thinking about that. There are only a few possibilities. Either our intelligence was compromised from the start, which means someone high up leaked the operation, or the target knew I was coming. You! Why would they know about you specifically?" "Because I've been hunting this network for years, Commander. I've disrupted their operations, eliminated key personnel, and cost them millions in lost revenue. If they had any indication I was involved in this mission, they would absolutely set a trap. The target we were after, he's not the top of the organization. He's middle management. But he would have been valuable for intelligence on the higher levels." Morrison understood. "So either we have a leak, or you have a leak." "Or both," Sarah said grimly. "Either way, this mission was compromised before we even inserted. I should have seen it. I should have recognized the signs." "You couldn't have known," Morrison said, though part of him wondered if that was true. Had there been warning signs? Had they moved too fast, trusted the intelligence too much? The helicopter ride lasted another 2 hours, taking them far from the contact area and across the border into friendly territory. They landed at a small airfield that Morrison did not recognize, somewhere in Poland based on the terrain. The wounded were immediately taken to a medical facility by personnel who wore no uniforms and asked no questions. Morrison and his team were debriefed by a man who identified himself only as Handler 3. He asked detailed questions about the mission, the compound layout, the hostile forces, and particularly about the extraction. Every time the conversation turned to Sarah or her role, the man's questions became more pointed. After the debrief, Morrison was told his team would be flown back to their base within 24 hours. They were to file standard after-action reports but were instructed to be vague about the intelligence source that had provided tunnel access. Sarah Chen would be listed simply as agency asset. No name, no details. Morrison found Sarah in a small office, staring at a map on the wall. She looked tired, the first time he had seen her show any real fatigue. He knocked on the doorframe and she turned. "Your team is cleared to leave tomorrow," she said. "They'll be fine. The wounded will make full recoveries. What about you? What happens now?" Sarah shrugged. "I'll be reassigned. New identity, new mission, new part of the world. The Ghost Angel codename is burned, so I'll become someone else. It's not the first time I've had to reinvent myself." Morrison stepped into the room. "That sounds like a lonely way to live." "It is," Sarah admitted. "But it's the job. I knew what I was signing up for when I joined this program." "Why did you join, I mean? You could have had a normal career, normal life. Why choose this?" Sarah turned back to the map, her finger tracing a route through Eastern Europe. "Do you know what was happening in this region 10 years ago, Commander? Human trafficking networks were moving thousands of women and children across borders. Arms dealers were supplying terrorist groups with weapons. Criminal organizations were operating with complete impunity. And the official channels, the military, the intelligence agencies, the law enforcement, they were all hamstrung by politics, bureaucracy, and rules of engagement. She turned to face him again, and Morrison saw something fierce in her eyes. "I was one of those women, Commander. When I was 17, I was taken by traffickers while traveling in Ukraine. They held me for 3 weeks, along with a dozen other girls. We were beaten, starved, and told we would be sold. But then someone came for us. I never saw their face, never learned their name. They just appeared one night, eliminated the traffickers, and got us to safety. When I asked who they were, I was told they didn't exist." Morrison felt his understanding shift. "So you became one of them?" "I spent 5 years after that preparing. I learned languages, studied combat techniques, earned degrees in international relations and computer science. I made myself into exactly the kind of person they would need. And when I was 22, they recruited me. I've been Ghost Angel for 7 years, and in that time, I've saved a lot of people. I've also killed a lot of people who needed killing. I have no regrets. Even now? Even after your cover is blown? Even now. Your team is alive. That matters more than any cover identity." Morrison extended his hand. "You're a hell of an operator, Sarah. If you ever need anything, you have my number." "Actually, do you have my number?" Sarah smiled and shook his hand. "I have everyone's number, Commander. It's part of the job." They talked for a while longer, trading stories and experiences. Morrison found himself genuinely liking this enigmatic woman who had dropped into his life and turned everything upside down. She was smart, capable, and driven by a moral code that Morrison could respect, even if her methods operated outside the conventional rules. The next morning, Morrison and his team boarded a military transport for the flight home. As the plane lifted off, Morrison looked out the window at the airfield below. He saw Sarah standing near a black SUV, watching the plane depart. She raised one hand in a brief wave, and then she was gone, climbing into the vehicle that would take her to whatever came next. The flight home was quiet. His team slept or sat in silence, processing what they had been through. Morrison spent the time writing his after-action report, carefully crafting the language to be accurate but vague where it needed to be. He knew his superiors would have questions. A mission that was supposed to be straightforward had turned into a run-and-gun battle, and only the intervention of unidentified assets had saved them. That would generate paperwork and inquiries for months. But Morrison also knew that some questions would never be answered. The Ghost Angel and the organization she worked for existed in the shadows for a reason. They did the jobs that no one else could or would do, and they accepted the cost of that work. Morrison had gotten a glimpse behind that curtain, and what he had seen was both impressive and unsettling. Back at Naval Special Warfare Command, Morrison faced the expected debriefs and questions. He told the truth where he could and remained vague where he had to. His commanding officer was not satisfied but accepted that some aspects of the mission were beyond their clearance level. The wounded team members recovered as expected, and within a few weeks, the team was back to its normal operational tempo. Morrison thought about Sarah often in the weeks that followed. He wondered where she was, what identity she was using now, what missions she was running. He also thought about the network she had mentioned, the criminal organization that had set the trap. Were they still out there, still operating? And if Sarah was hunting them, would she succeed? 2 months after the mission, Morrison received an unmarked envelope in his office mail. Inside was a single photograph showing a building on fire, somewhere in Eastern Europe based on the architecture. On the back, written in neat handwriting, were 4 words, "One down, many remaining." Morrison knew who had sent it. He filed the photograph away in his personal safe, a reminder that the war against the people who preyed on the innocent was ongoing, and that there were warriors fighting that war who would never receive recognition or thanks. 3 months after that, Morrison was called into a classified briefing with officers from multiple agencies. The subject was international criminal networks and emerging threats. During the presentation, one of the intelligence officers mentioned a recent series of disruptions to a major trafficking organization. Key figures had been eliminated, financial networks disrupted, and several high-value arrests made by European authorities. We're not sure who's responsible, the intelligence officer admitted. The operations show a level of sophistication and intelligence access that suggests state sponsorship, but no country is claiming credit. Whoever is running this campaign, they're very good, and they seem to have unlimited resources. Morrison said nothing, but he thought he knew who was responsible, and he hoped that whoever Ghost Angel had become in her new identity, she was safe and successful in her mission. A year later, Morrison's team was deployed to Southeast Asia for a joint training operation. On his third day in country, he was walking through a market in Bangkok when he saw a familiar face. She was dressed in local clothes, her hair styled differently, and she wore glasses she had not worn before. But Morrison recognized the eyes. Sarah saw him at the same moment. For a brief instant, neither of them moved. Then she gave him the slightest nod and turned away, disappearing into the crowd. Morrison did not follow. He understood that in her world, being recognized could be dangerous, but it was good to know she was still out there, still fighting. Morrison continued his career, eventually rising to the rank of captain and taking command of a larger SEAL unit. He led successful missions, trained new generations of operators, and earned the respect of his peers. But he never forgot the mission where he had learned that sometimes the most valuable allies were the ones who operated in the shadows, the ones who sacrificed their own recognition and safety to keep others safe. He also never forgot the lessons Sarah had taught him about judging people by their appearance rather than their actions. He had looked at her and seen someone who did not fit his expectations of what a warrior should look like. He had been wrong, and that error in judgment had almost cost him and his team everything. It was a mistake he was determined never to make again. 5 years after the mission, Morrison was attending a conference on special operations when he was approached by a nondescript man in a suit. The man handed him a business card with nothing but a phone number on it. "Commander Morrison, you have been identified as someone who understands discretion and has experience working with unconventional assets. If you are ever in a situation where conventional channels cannot provide the support you need, call this number. Ask for Shepard." Before Morrison could respond, the man walked away and disappeared into the crowd. Morrison looked at the card, then carefully placed it in his wallet. He understood what was being offered. Access to the same network that Sarah worked for, the ghosts who operated outside official channels. It was an emergency backup, something he hoped he would never need to use. But it was also a recognition of what he had learned on that mission. Sometimes the right tool for a job was not the one you expected. Sometimes the person who could save your life did not look like a warrior or come from the expected background. Sometimes the angels were ghosts. Morrison kept that card in his wallet for the rest of his career. He never used it, but knowing it was there gave him comfort. Somewhere out there, people like Sarah Chen were fighting battles that no one would ever hear about, making sacrifices that would never be acknowledged. They were the silent guardians, operating in the shadows so that others could live in the light. Years later, after Morrison had retired and was living a quiet life in Colorado, he received one final communication. It came in the form of a letter, handwritten on plain paper, delivered to his home address. He did not recognize the handwriting, but he recognized the style, brief, direct, and carefully constructed to reveal little. The letter read, "Commander Morrison, I hope this letter finds you well in retirement. I wanted you to know that the network we encountered all those years ago has been dismantled. It took longer than I hoped, and the cost was higher than I wanted, but the job is done. The people who preyed on the innocent, who set that trap for us, they no longer exist. I also wanted to thank you. That night when you trusted me, when you let me make that call even though it meant exposing who I was, you saved more than just your team. You saved my faith that there are still good people doing good work in this world. That matters more than you know. I am retiring from active service. The Ghost Angel and all her other names are being laid to rest. I have earned the right to live a normal life, or at least to try. I hope to find some peace after years of war. If you are ever in Seattle and happen to visit the Pike Place Market on a Saturday morning, you might see a woman selling flowers at a small stand near the water. She might look familiar, though older, and wearing her hair differently than you remember. If you do see her, Feel free to stop and say hello. She would enjoy hearing how your life has gone. Thank you for everything, Commander. It was an honor to fight beside you. Ghost Angel. Morrison read the letter 3 times, then carefully filed it away with the photograph she had sent years ago. The following month, he made a trip to Seattle. On Saturday morning, he walked through Pike Place Market, taking his time, enjoying the sounds and smells of the busy marketplace. He found the flower stand near the water, run by a woman with dark hair streaked with gray, wearing simple clothes and a warm smile. She was helping a customer select a bouquet, laughing at something they said. Morrison waited until the customer left, then approached the stand. "Those roses are beautiful," he said. The woman looked up and Morrison saw recognition in her eyes, followed by genuine pleasure. "Thank you. They just came in this morning. Would you like some?" "I think I would. Could you recommend which ones are best?" Sarah, or whatever name she was using now, smiled and began selecting flowers, wrapping them carefully. As she worked, she spoke quietly. "I meant what I said in the letter. I'm retired now. This is my life, selling flowers and trying to be normal." "Do you miss it?" Morrison asked. "The work? The missions?" "Sometimes," she admitted, handing him the wrapped bouquet. "But mostly I'm just tired. I gave everything I had to that life, and it gave me purpose. But there has to be more to existence than fighting in the shadows. So I'm trying to find out what that more looks like." Morrison paid for the flowers, leaving a generous tip. "For what it's worth, I think you've earned some peace. And Sarah, if you ever need anything, you know how to reach me." "I do. And the same goes for you, Commander. Though I hope neither of us ever has to make that call." They shook hands. And Morrison walked away, carrying his bouquet of roses. He looked back once to see Sarah helping another customer, looking content and at peace. It was a good ending to a story that had started in darkness and violence. Morrison thought about the journey that had brought them both to this moment. He had learned so much from that mission and from Sarah. He had learned about courage, sacrifice, and the importance of looking beyond appearances. He had learned that heroes come in all forms, and sometimes the most powerful warriors are the ones who fight without recognition or glory. Most importantly, he had learned that in a world full of darkness, there were still people willing to stand in the shadows and fight so that others could live in the light. They were the ghosts, the angels, the silent guardians. And Morrison was honored to have known one of them. As he drove back to his hotel, Morrison thought about his own journey. He had spent decades serving his country, leading men in combat, making difficult decisions, and living with the consequences. He had saved lives and taken lives. He had experienced triumph and tragedy. And through it all, he had tried to do the right thing, to be the kind of leader his men deserved. Now, in retirement, Morrison found himself thinking often about legacy. What would he be remembered for? What impact had he made? The official records would show his missions, his commendations, his achievements. But Morrison knew that the most important moments of his career would never appear in those records. The times when he had made the hard choice, when he had trusted his instincts, when he had put the lives of others before his own safety or career advancement. The mission with Ghost Angel had been one of those moments. It had challenged his assumptions, pushed him beyond his comfort zone, and ultimately made him a better leader and a better person. That was worth more than any medal or promotion. Morrison kept the roses from Sarah's flower stand in a vase on his table for 2 weeks, watching them slowly fade. When they finally wilted, he pressed one of the petals in a book, preserving it as a reminder. A reminder that even in the darkest times, even when everything seemed lost, there were still people willing to sacrifice everything to do what was right. And that, Morrison reflected, was what true heroism looked like. Not the glory of recognition, not the reward of fame, but the quiet determination to stand up and fight for those who could not fight for themselves. To operate in the shadows so that others could live in the light. To be a ghost when necessary and an angel when called upon. Morrison never saw Sarah again after that day in the market. He did not try to find her or contact her. She had earned her peace, and he would not disturb it. But he thought of her often, especially when he heard news stories about trafficking rings being dismantled, or when he met young operators who reminded him of his younger self. To those young operators, Morrison would sometimes tell a story. He would never mention names or specific details, but he would tell them about a mission where everything went wrong, where they were outnumbered and outgunned, and where salvation came from an unexpected source. He would tell them about the importance of keeping an open mind, of judging people by their actions rather than their appearance, and of recognizing that courage comes in many forms. And sometimes, when he was alone with his thoughts, Morrison would raise a glass to the ghosts and angels who operated in the shadows, the ones who would never receive parades or medals, who would never be mentioned in history books, but who made the world a safer place through their sacrifice and dedication. To Ghost Angel, wherever she was, Morrison hoped she had found the peace she deserved. And he hoped that somewhere, someday, someone would tell her story, even if her name could never be spoken aloud. Because heroes deserve to be remembered, even the ones who fought in silence. The world needed its ghosts and angels. And Morrison was grateful he had known one of the best,